Elias was a man built of lightning and glass. He possessed a mind that could dissect complex market trends in seconds, yet his heart was a tinderbox waiting for a single spark. In the high-stakes world of corporate negotiations, Elias was a legend for his strategy, but a liability for his temper. He moved with a predatory grace, unaware that the very fire that fueled his ambition was also consuming the foundation of his life. The day everything shattered began with a low hum of tension in the executive boardroom. Elias sat across from Marcus, a rival with a cold, calculating smile. Marcus was a psychological predator who knew exactly where the cracks in Elias's armor were hidden. As the presentation reached its peak, Marcus leaned forward and whispered a barbed comment about Elias's late father, a cruel insult designed to draw blood. It worked perfectly. Elias didn't just snap, he erupted. He slammed his fists onto the mahogany table, shouting words that echoed with career-ending finality. The investors watched in stunned silence as the most brilliant man in the room transformed into an impulsive child. By the time the security guards arrived, the contract was gone, and so was Elias's hard-earned reputation. The aftermath was a slow, agonizing crawl through the wreckage of his life. His phone, once a source of constant vibration, went silent. His wife's eyes now held a weary disappointment that hurt more than any corporate rejection. 2 weeks later, Elias sat alone in his empty office. The boxes of his life stacked like headstones. He realized then that he wasn't a leader, he was a slave. He was a prisoner to every passing feeling, a puppet whose strings were pulled by anyone clever enough to provoke him. He was powerless against his own impulses. The silence of the room was a heavy weight that pressed against his chest. In the depths of this despair, a memory flickered, a story his grandfather used to tell him when he was a boy. It was a tale of a legendary man who lived atop the jagged peaks of the northern range, a master who had conquered the art of the still mind. His grandfather had spoken of this man not as a fighter, but as a rock in the middle of a rushing river, unmoved and utterly powerful. With nothing left to lose, Elias packed a single bag. He traded his tailored suits for heavy wool and his luxury sedan for a ticket to the edge of the wilderness. The journey was grueling. The air grew thin as he climbed higher, leaving the frantic noise of the city behind. The path was narrow and treacherous, mirroring the internal struggle he felt with every step. He wanted to turn back, to hide, to scream at the sky, but he kept moving. He was chasing a hope that there was a way to live without being a victim of his own mind. As a storm brewed, Elias found a stone hut perched on a precipice. Inside, he found an elderly man sitting by a small fire. The man didn't look like a warrior. He looked like peace itself. Despite the wind howling against the stones and the thunder shaking the ground, the mentor remained impossibly calm, his eyes reflecting the steady glow of the embers. Elias collapsed onto a wooden stool, his breath ragged. He poured out his story of failure and rage, expecting pity. Instead, the mentor smiled softly. He told Elias that his emotions were not his enemies. The problem was Elias's belief that he had to obey them. The mentor promised to teach him how to win by doing nothing. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Elias looked into the fire, realizing the work was just beginning. Elias woke the next morning, expecting to be taught complex meditation or ancient combat techniques. Instead, the mentor handed him a single task: sit on a wooden stool and watch a flame. For hours, the only sound was the crackling wick and the whisper of the wind outside. The wood of the stool was hard, offering no comfort to his aching back. Every time Elias's mind wandered to his lost career or the stinging memory of his failure, the mentor would tap a bamboo stick against the stone floor. It was a sharp, sudden crack that made Elias jump. instantly shattering his internal monologue. This was not the physical training he had envisioned. It was a grueling psychological war against his own inherent restlessness. Between the stimulus and the response, the mentor whispered softly during a rare moment of instruction, "There is a space. In that space lies our freedom and our power. Your entire life, Elias, has been lived as a desperate reaction. You have never truly stepped into the gap." Elias tried to grasp the concept, but his mind remained a storm of what-ifs and if-onlys. The mentor explained that the greatest masters were not those who struck the fastest, but those who decided whether to strike at all. To enter the gap was to claim ownership over one's own soul and destiny. Then came the trial that nearly broke his spirit. For 3 consecutive days, the mentor abandoned his gentle demeanor. He began to speak with sudden, calculated venom. He echoed every insecurity Elias had ever harbored in the dark. He called Elias a coward who hid behind expensive suits and corporate jargon. He mocked his grandfather, calling Elias a disgrace to the old man's memory. He brought up the board meeting, describing Elias's meltdown with cruel laughter, painting him as a pathetic, broken child. Elias felt the heat rising in his chest, a familiar, burning tide. His fingers curled into white-knuckled fists, and his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The urge to strike the old man was a physical ache in his arms. His ego screamed for defense, demanding he justify his past actions. Each insult felt like a hot needle under his skin. He wanted to pack his bag and leave, but every time he moved to stand, the mentor's gaze pinned him down, a gaze that was not hateful, but clinical and observant. On the 4th day, something shifted. As the mentor spoke of Elias's failures, Elias did not feel the usual surge of adrenaline. Instead, he felt the anger rise like a wave, but he did not drown in it. He looked at the emotion as if it were a separate entity, a dark cloud passing across a clear blue sky. He watched the tightness in his throat and the heat in his ears, but he no longer identified with them. "I'm not the anger," he realized. "I am the sky that holds the cloud." The silence that followed was not the heavy, suffocating silence of his empty office. It was a profound, light stillness that resonated deep within his bones. The mentor stopped speaking and nodded slowly. He explained that provocations are like ghosts. They only have substance if you give them your energy. If you remain a mirror, the ghost has nowhere to land. People like Marcus, the mentor said, feed on the reactions of others. Without a reaction, they are starving and powerless. Elias began to see his rival not as a monster, but as a deeply flawed man, trapped in his own cycle of manipulation. A week later, news arrived from the city through a mountain traveler. Marcus was moving for the kill. He had leveraged Elias's former company into a corner and was preparing a final merger that would dismantle Elias's entire professional legacy and erase his name. The news should have ignited a fire, but instead, Elias felt a strange, detached clarity. The mentor told Elias he was ready to return to the arena. As Elias prepared to leave, the mentor grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "You are ready to face him," the mentor warned, his voice like grinding stone. "But remember this, the moment you feel you must win, you have already lost." Elias nodded, stepped onto the narrow mountain path, and began the long descent back toward the world he had once lost. The glass doors of the executive boardroom slid open with a sharp, clinical hiss. Elias stepped inside, his presence filling the room with an unfamiliar gravity that silenced the murmurs. He didn't wear the armor of a high-priced suit this time. He wore a simple blazer and a look of profound, unshakable stillness. The investors, who had watched him crumble months before, leaned back in their leather chairs in surprise. Across the mahogany table sat Marcus, his fingers drumming a predatory, rhythmic beat. Marcus didn't hide his disdain, a crooked smile playing on his lips as if he were facing a defeated man. He expected the Elias of old, the man whose blood boiled at every slight and whose ego was a fragile kingdom. But as Elias took his seat, he didn't offer a defense. He simply existed in the space, his eyes reflecting the room like a mountain lake at dawn. Marcus began his assault immediately. He didn't start with numbers, he started with the knives. He spoke of Elias's sabbatical, mocking the time spent in the mountains. He brought up the previous board meeting, detailing Elias's past outburst with cruel, surgical precision to reopen old wounds. He called Elias a relic, a man who had lost his nerve and his mind. Every word was a calculated spark designed to ignite the dry tinder of Elias's temper. The board members shifted uncomfortably, the air turning heavy with Marcus's malice. Yet the explosion never came. Elias sat perfectly still, watching Marcus's lips move. He saw the insults as the mentor had described them, grey ghosts drifting through the air, unable to find a place to land. He felt the familiar heat in his chest, but it remained a distant sensation, a campfire seen from a high ridge. Because Elias refused to provide the resistance Marcus craved, the antagonist began to lose his own center. Marcus's voice grew louder, his movements more erratic as the silence stretched. He was like a boxer swinging at a shadow, exhausting himself with every missed blow. In his desperate need to provoke a reaction, Marcus's focus on the actual contract began to slip. He rushed through his final presentation slides, his arrogance blinding him to the technicalities. He presented a revised merger agreement, but his hands were shaking with suppressed irritation. He was so focused on winning the psychological war that he failed to notice a glaring contradiction in the liability clauses, a mistake that would have bankrupted the investors within a single year. Elias leaned forward. He didn't interrupt. He waited for the silence to settle. When he finally spoke, his voice was a calm, resonant clarity that cut through the tension like a blade. He didn't address the insults or the personal attacks. Instead, he pointed out the critical flaw on page 42. He explained with surgical precision how Marcus's proposal was built on short-term greed and long-term ruin. He didn't use anger as a weapon. He used the simple truth. The investors looked from the frantic, sweating Marcus to the serene, unshakable Elias. The choice was no longer about a contract. It was about who they trusted to lead them through a storm. The vote was unanimous. Elias's counter-proposal was accepted, and his legacy was restored. The room emptied slowly, leaving the two rivals alone. Marcus sat slumped, the weight of his own bitterness crushing him. Elias stood up, but he didn't gloat. He didn't feel the rush of victory he once would have. Instead, he felt a quiet compassion for the man still trapped in his own impulse. Elias walked to the table and extended his hand. It was a demonstration of the ultimate power, the power to let go. Marcus looked at the hand, confused and broken, as Elias walked out into the sunlight. He realized the still mind wasn't about winning a negotiation. It was about winning the war within. Your emotions are the weather, but you are the sky. When you stop obeying the storm, you finally command the world.